Good morning. So last week we saw Isaiah's temple vision in Isaiah 6. We saw God high and exalted, and as the true king of Israel, or Judah, since the human king had just passed away, according to the first verse there. We also saw Isaiah's recognition that he was a sinful person from a sinful people, and that God could rightly, justly crush him. However, God, instead of crushing him, he spared him and purified him. We talked about our need for God to purify us so that we can serve him as Isaiah got ready to serve him. This week, we're going to take a look at the message that Isaiah has for Ahaz. So we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 7. I'm going to read verses 1 through 9. Now it happened in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, that's the northern kingdom of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not conquer it. When it was told to the house of David, saying, the Arameans have camped in Ephraim, his heart and the hearts of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Then Yahweh said to Isaiah, go out now and meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Yashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool, to the highway of the fuller's field. And say to him, take care and stay quiet. Have no fear and do not be faint-hearted because of these two stubs of smoldering firebrands, on account of the burning anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Because Aram, with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah, has counseled evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrorize it, and make for ourselves a breach in its walls, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it. Thus says Lord Yahweh, it shall not stand, nor shall it happen, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Now within another 65 years Ephraim will be shattered, so that it is no longer a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you do not establish your faith in Yahweh, you shall surely not be established. Now the temple vision of chapter 6, we're told, happened when Uzziah died, in that year that he died. And now we're thrust into the years of Ahaz, his grandson. So you may be wondering how much time has passed since chapter 6 and now here in chapter 7. It's only about 5 years, actually. You may not think that's enough for a grandson, grandfather-grandson timeline here, but when I talked about Uzziah being a good king, he was, but if you continued reading in Chronicles and Kings, you'd see that he eventually turned from Yahweh, and because of that, Yahweh made him a leper, which meant he couldn't be in public anymore, he couldn't really be king, so his son Jotham took over. And then eventually Uzziah died, so for there to be only a 5-year period here is not that big of a leap. We see here that Ahaz is worried about his enemies being so close, relatively speaking. Right? Ahaz had not done what Yahweh said was right. He did not do things pleasing to Yahweh. You can find out more about that in Kings and Chronicles. And so Yahweh sends Isaiah and his son, Shear-Yashub, to meet Ahaz. Now, Shear-Yashub means a remnant will return. And Shear is the remnant part there, so it's first, that's the important thing in that name. So I see here God proclaiming hope at the end of judgment because of the name of Isaiah's son. Now, how exactly Ahaz would have taken this, who knows? Perhaps he's taking it as, that there will be a destruction because only a remnant will be left. Or perhaps he's thinking, God is merciful because there's going to be a remnant left. Could be either way. They're meeting him at a pool. This suggests that Ahaz is checking the city's water supply, which is going to be very important if Jerusalem comes under siege. Hezekiah's tunnel had not yet been built, and so Jerusalem didn't have a reliable source of water within the city that would always be there. Verses 4 through 9, we see Yahweh's message to Ahaz that he need not worry about Rezin and Pekah, for they're nothing but show. These two stubs of smoldering firebrands. Have you been to a fire, a bonfire? You get the heat going and it's nice and big. And we have a pit in our backyard, actually. My late stepdad made it. And we haven't used it in a while, but he connected some fans to some pipes over here, and it blows air into the pit, causing it to be even hotter and brighter. And it's a really nice fire pit. But when the fire's gone, all that's left is a bunch of smoke. Right? And the wood's still hot. You could blow on it, and it could get red and burn again. But what we have here, if you pulled out a stick, an end that's not burned, obviously don't burn yourself. You pull it out and you look at it, you got a smoldering firebrand. That's what these two guys are. It's nothing but smoke. Right? The fire's gone out. So these two guys aren't a big issue. And that's how God's describing them and why he's saying you don't need to worry about them. Oh, they plan to attack. It's not going to happen. The best laid plans of mice and men, right? Or a saying that I've heard, I think my mom's fond of this saying, man plans and God laughs. Yeah. God's telling Ahaz to trust him, to trust his God. The other option that we don't see here, but we can know from reading further and also history, is for Ahaz to turn to and trust Assyria. If he trusts Yahweh, then he won't have to worry about Rezin or Pekah or Tiglath, the king of Assyria, or anyone else for that matter. As Paul put it, if God is for us, who can be against us? Right? But what if he trusts Assyria? Well, firstly, that means that he doesn't trust God, which is a terrible thing. Secondly, it would undoubtedly mean that he would have to at least pay lip service to the so-called gods and goddesses of Assyria, as if they were somehow more powerful than the one true living God. Of course, he was probably already worshiping these gods or their counterparts in his culture. And, being a vassal of another king, paying tribute to that king, I don't think it's worth it, honestly. In case you're wondering about vassals and tributes, I kind of liken it to our forefathers in this country and the Revolutionary War. It's not quite the same, but they didn't want to pay tax without being represented. Tax and tribute are different. They were colonies of King George, right? They weren't vassals, but they were still under his control, and they didn't like that, so they fought to be free. I think those feelings of the colonies towards George would be very similar to any vassal and the king that's conquered them. Right? Again, not the same, but I think the feelings are similar. At any rate, as I said, Yahweh is saying, Ahaz, trust me, or you will fall. Let's continue on here in verses 10 to 17. Then Yahweh spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask for a sign for yourself from Yahweh your God. Make it deep as Sheol or high as heaven. And Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not test Yahweh. Then he said, listen now, O house of David. Is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men, that you will try the patience of my God as well? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey in order that he will know to refuse evil and choose good. For before the boy will know to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Yahweh will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house days which have never come since the day Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. Now Yahweh says to Ahaz, hey, ask for a sign. Let me prove to you that I'm trustworthy. Probably talking through Isaiah, not directly speaking to Ahaz, I would think, but anyway. As deep as Sheol, or as high as heaven. Now, I think I've mentioned before, Sheol is the grave, right? It's not hell. It's the resting place of the dead. And heaven here, I think, is referring to what you and I would call the outmost reaches of outer space. Not God's heavenly throne room. The Hebrew word and the Greek word, for that matter, that we translate as heaven can be sky or space or the heavenly throne room. So I think what God's saying here is choose anything within this creation that you're a part of, because I'm in control of it. I created it. I can prove to you that I'm trustworthy. Right? That's what I think God is saying. Now Ahaz, he rather foolishly refuses and does so with some vain attempt at piety, religiosity. Right? Oh, I'm not going to trust God. We're not supposed to do that. He's asking you to test him. But he's saying, no. Now, test has a couple different meanings, right? A parent might say to a child, "Oh, don't test my patience." Right? You've told them time and time again, "Don't do this," and they do it, or vice versa. Do this, and they don't do it. We don't want to test God that way. Right? That's what Ahaz is doing here, and what others have done throughout history, for that matter. But God wants us to know that we can trust him, that there is a proper way to test him. He's asking Ahaz to do that. Some examples for us, too. I think in Malachi, God tells his people to test him with their tithes and offerings and see if he doesn't open the floodgates of blessing. Right? The Bereans, now they're testing Paul, I will grant that, but they're searching the scriptures to see if Paul is right. And since Paul is God's messenger, they're kind of testing God, too, in that regard. John tells us to test the spirits, see if they're from God. If they are, we're testing God again, right? But that's a proper testing of God. Taking a leap of faith is acceptable for a test of God. Right? I'm going to give you this. Okay, hey, you did what you said, so now I'm going to give you everything else. Right? That's acceptable. But to not do what God has asked you to do, or to do what he's asked you not to do, that's not an acceptable test. And that's what's going on in verse 13 when he says, "No, I'm not going to do that." When Isaiah then turns and says, "O house of David," referring to Ahaz, the descendant of David, "why are you testing my God? Is it too small for you to test humans too?" Now, Isaiah here is saying, "my God." I think he's telling Ahaz, Yahweh isn't really your God, is he? Even though earlier Yahweh says, test Yahweh your God. He's not really following me. He's not really his God. So Isaiah says, "Well, the Lord will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel." Now, I looked this up. Some Bibles capitalize the his of his name, whereas others don't. We know that Matthew uses this verse as one of the many prophecies fulfilled by Christ, which it definitely is. The Holy Spirit would know better than we do on these things. But people look at verses 15 to 17, and they use that to say that this must be a prophecy that Ahaz would have been able to verify, to confirm, right? And Ahaz didn't live for 700 plus years to see the time of Christ. So the young woman, the Hebrew word Alma, which means young woman, it doesn't strictly mean virgin, but they say that must be some young woman in the court who's going to have a child and actually name him Emmanuel. Well, prophecies have a dual fulfillment quite often. One for the people to whom it's made so they can verify it for something going on then, and then one for the future Messiah. So if anyone tells you, Isaiah 7:14 isn't about Jesus, well, they're half right, but they're also wrong. It's for both Ahaz and the Messiah. Emmanuel, as I'm sure you know, means God with us, or God is with us. Just like Shir Yashub earlier, God is giving Ahaz a message through the name of a child. He is with his people. In this case, I think it's the remnant that will be there, hence Shir Yashub. We also see God is going to act quickly. Right? This child won't be very old before God brings calamity upon Judah. And this calamity being the king of Assyria himself, the very person that Ahaz was going to put his trust in. He shouldn't have trusted Tiglath, but he did. So let's see what's going to happen to Judah here in verses 18 to 25. "And it will be in that day that Yahweh will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will all come and rest upon the steep ravines, on the crevices of the cliffs, on all the thorn bushes, and on all the watering places. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor one hired from regions beyond the river, that is the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and it will also remove the beard. And it will be in that day that a man will keep alive, or may keep alive, a heifer and a pair of sheep. And because of the abundance of the milk produced, he will eat curds, for everyone that is left within the land will eat curds and honey. And it will be in that day that every place where there used to be 1,000 vines, valued at 1,000 shekels of silver, will be briars and thorns. People will come there with bows and arrows, because all the land will be theirs. Will be briars and thorns, sorry. As for all the hills, which used to be cultivated with the hoe, You will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place of pasturing oxen and for sheep to trample. So God, once again, is calling the nations to come and trample his vineyard, as we saw, I believe, in chapter 5 of Isaiah. Specifically here, he's calling Egypt and Assyria. Now, these were two powers back then and in that time, and they both wanted Israel, A, to have access to each other, and B, because there were a lot of trade routes through there, because they got the Mediterranean and Israel's right here on the eastern coast. So you could go by boat or you could go by land through Israel. Now, there's no connection that I'm aware of between Egypt and the fly or Assyria and the bee, at least nothing that's substantial and significant. However, based on the scriptures and based on history, I think Egypt is the fly because they're more of an annoyance at this point in history, while Assyria is the bee because, well, that's the nation God is going to use to sting Judah, if you will. Both of these insects swarm, and that's exactly what these nations would do when God calls them. They're going to swarm upon Judah. Now, the razor hired from beyond the river, we're told that's the king of Assyria. The irony here is that Ahaz had hired Assyria to help him with Pekah and Rezin, and God is going to hire Assyria to deal with Ahaz and Judah. The shaving of the head, legs, and beard, well, that's a reference to the humiliation which prisoners would have been treated with when Assyria came through. What about this man who manages to keep a heifer and a pair of sheep alive? Well, now, a heifer is an older cow, not a young one in its prime. But the thing here is that there's going to be so much milk that they're going to have to curdle it in order to keep it and eat it. And, of course, they have honey too. I don't think this is a positive thing. Right? Some look at this and say, oh, there's a remnant, there's still people there, they have plenty of food. All that's true, I suppose, but the fact that they have to curdle it, the milk, I mean, I've drank in some milk that was curdled by accident and I didn't care for it. I think what Yahweh is saying here is the destruction will be so complete, there's going to be so few people that the animals can produce plenty, but those animals aren't going to be the best animals either. We also see here the land going from a cultivated land to one where there's briars and thorns growing up, right? Unimpeded, that's just wild. The people coming with bows and arrows, well, those are hunters, because that's all the land's good for is hunting. It's not good for planting anymore. And of course, as we saw earlier, the animals come in and trample the ground and feed on it. I want to continue here because the story for Ahaz continues in chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Then Yahweh said to me, take for yourself a large tablet and write on it in ordinary letters concerning Mahir-Shalal-Hashbaz. And I will take to myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. Then I drew near to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then Yahweh said to me, call his name Mahir-Shalal-Hashbaz. For before the boy knows to cry out, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. Now, Isaiah starts giving us a first-hand account here. He's becoming a living picture message to the people of Judah. The word for tablet here is something used of mirrors in other places. And mirrors back then were polished metal. They weren't glass with a little thin piece of metal on it like ours are. However, this could also be a table. So people debate if this is wood or metal. I think it's metal. It's a placard of some kind. It's something Yahweh wanted to have around for his people to be able to read, not easily destroyed. So that's why I think metal. Now, Mahir-Shalal-Hashbaz, that's quite a name, and I wouldn't choose it for a child if you're looking for one. And it means swift is plunder, speedy is prey. It's a warning about what would happen when Assyria comes in and takes over Judah. The witnesses, I think, they're to make a point that Isaiah did prophesy about this beforehand. It wasn't an after-the-fact thing. He's not a Monday morning quarterback kind of guy. The two guys chosen, they weren't exactly in Yahweh's good graces either. So I think they're chosen to, again, make another point that he can use even bad eggs for good stuff. Now, what we have here, Isaiah coming near to the prophetess, and she conceives a child. So there's a euphemism there. If you're an adult, you get it. This is Isaiah's wife. Okay, it's not something outside of that. I think she's called a prophetess because she was one, not because she was married to one, but there's debate on that as well. Now, is this Mahir Shalal Hashbaz, is that the same child as 7:14? Perhaps. The name's different, obviously. Either way, we see that the destruction of Damascus and Samaria by Assyria is not far off, especially if the reference here of the child looking and calling my father or my mother, if that's really just looking at mom and saying mama, or dad and saying dada, that's not very far off at all, right? 9 months plus a few more. How many more? So it could be that initial, for Ahaz and his people, here's the proof of what I told you in 7:14. We'll see here in a little bit about the more far off part of the prophecy, though. I want to go ahead and read 5 through 10 now. Again, Yahweh spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gentle flowing waters of Shiloah, and rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah, now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them the mighty and abundant waters of the river, the king of Assyria, and all his glory. And it will rise up over its channels and go over its banks. Then it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass through. It will reach even to the neck, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Be broken, O peoples, and be shattered, and give ear, all remote places of the earth. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Devise counsel, and it will be thwarted. Speak a word, and it will not stand, for God is with us. So some time has passed now between verse 4 and verse 5. Judah is rejoicing at the destruction of Rezin by Assyria. But now, that river, the king of Assyria, Tiglath, he will come and flood them, if you will. His destructive forces are not just for Judah's enemies, but for them as well. God will not protect his people if they do not believe in him and trust him. We also see here that Emmanuel is the owner of the land of Judah. Therefore, I think that while Mahir Shalal Hashbaz might have been the fulfillment for Ahaz, Emmanuel is the ultimate fulfillment of 7:14 for us, God incarnate, Jesus Christ. Right? Then Isaiah's tone shifts. We see here God's people being protected. Right? The peoples of the earth are shattered upon his protection over his people. No matter how great their tactical strategies, no matter how they plan, it's going to be thwarted by God. Because Emmanuel, God is with us. Not the rebellious people of Judah, but with the remnant, with the believers, those who trust him. And yes, at the end of verse 10 there, for God is with us, that's also Emmanuel in the Hebrew. I want to go ahead and finish this little section, not the entire chapter. The chapter and verse numbers are not inspired, so we have odd breaks here. But let's go ahead and read 11 to 18. For this Yahweh spoke to me with a strong hand and disciplined me not to walk in the way of his people, saying, you are not to say it is a conspiracy, in regard to all that this people call a conspiracy. And you are not to fear what they fear, and you shall not tremble. It is Yahweh of hosts, whom you should regard as holy, and he shall be your fear, and he shall be your cause of trembling. Then he shall become a sanctuary, but to both the houses of Israel, a stone to strike and a rock to stumble over, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many will stumble over them, then they will fall and be broken. They will even be snared and caught. Bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait for Yahweh, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope for him. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh has given me are for signs and wonders in Israel, from Yahweh of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. The rest of the chapter we'll save for next week. What is this conspiracy theory thing going on here? Don't really know. We're not really sure. But perhaps people are saying, oh no, Assyria isn't going to attack us. God's going to protect us. Don't listen to that Isaiah fellow. That could be. But I think the point, especially for us today, is to not give in to paranoia, right? Are things going on behind the scenes? I'm sure they are, but God's still in control, even further behind the scenes, right? He's allowing certain things to happen to them, to us today, right? He's refining his people, those who trust him. He's removing the dross that we talked about before. Both for Judah and us, we're not to fear what this world fears. And we are to reverently fear God. And in doing so, he becomes our sanctuary. A stone to strike and a rock to stumble over. This verse is quoted in the New Testament as a reference to Jesus, which of course it is. But here, it's for those who don't believe in or fear or trust Yahweh. Right? He is the stone that they stub their toe on, I would say. They stumble over. Right? They're not purposefully striking it. They're just walking along and kick it. Their plans are going to continue to fail because they never take into account that, this path to get them from point A to point B in their plans. They don't take into account the stone that's there that they keep stumbling over. They keep forgetting about it for some reason. And the same goes for those today who will not accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior, of course. They have plans, and he trips them up. The testimony and the law here, being bound up and sealed to his disciples, that's a reference, I believe, to the scriptures that had been written up to this point. It's Isaiah, I think, calling Judah back to God. Right? Some take this to mean that Isaiah left public ministry at this point, but I think that would lessen what happened in chapter 6. I don't think he's leaving public ministry. Rather, I think he's waiting for Yahweh to give him another message to go give. And clearly, he sees himself and his children as picture lessons for Judah, as people who will be living for God and doing signs and wonders and whatnot. A testimony that is promised to them before things happen. So what do we get from all this? Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to trust Yahweh in our life? In this election and everything that's going to happen afterwards? Or are we going to look to some human effort to make things right? Right, if we establish our faith in Yahweh, then he establishes us. But if we establish our faith in something else, like Ahaz did with the king of Assyria, then Yahweh won't establish us, he'll actually be against us, right? Jesus gave a parable about two men who each built a house. I'm sure you know it. One on the rock and one on the sand. The one who built his house upon the rock, well, he weathered the storms. Right? The one who built upon the sand, not so much. We know that Jesus is the rock upon which we build our house, upon which we build our foundations, our trust. That same rock that we build upon is the rock that the world stumbles over, the rock the world doesn't like. So from this, we can see that we need to trust Yahweh in everything. Easier said than done, I get that. I've got things in my life that I have a hard time giving up. Working on it. We'll see. But I hope that you will take example here from Isaiah 7 and 8. Take a negative example, if you will, from Ahaz. Don't do what he did, but do what Isaiah was doing. Trusting Yahweh. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you for your wisdom in giving us these words and preserving them for us. I thank you that we get to see that you give people a chance to choose you or to choose something else, and that you warn them of what will happen either way, of the blessing to come if they choose you and the curses to come if they don't. I pray, Lord, that you will be with us each day, that we will remember to focus in on you and to trust you for what is going on, be it where our next meal will come from, how we're going to pay the bills, or what's happening in the election right now. I pray, Lord, that you will be with us to be Isaiahs in our culture, to turn back our culture to you. I pray that you will not yet give up on us, But if it is time, Lord, give us the strength to know that this is what you want to do and what needs to be done. And help us to trust you, whatever may come. Right now, Lord, please be with us as we get ready to part ways. For those of us going to the study, may we learn how we can bolster our faith in Scriptures and in you and give that message to others. And then be with all of us as we go home. Keep us safe on the roads and keep our eyes and ears open for those whom you want us to interact with. It's in your name, Lord, I pray. Amen.